Hey folks, welcome to Teams Day Online Governance Summit. We will get started in about 5 minutes. We will start at 12:05 and begin our event. Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining Teams Day Online. We have a very special event today and a very special guest speaker. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items to let you know that we are recording the event today and we will post it to our YouTube channel. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I will post it into the link into the chat for you. We are going to try and answer questions today as they come up. So please post into the chat, into the Q&A, and we will address those throughout the session. So with that, I think we will go ahead and get started. You know, governance is one of those topics and all that we have all struggled with to some extent in finding the right balance between what is, you know, fostering collaboration versus shutting down collaboration, and, you know, protecting companies' intellectual property and all. And it's just always been a tough balance to find what's right for your individual culture at your company. And today we're going to help you address a lot of those issues. So with that, what I'd like to do is introduce our guest speaker, and she was actually named to the top 2020 influencers for Microsoft Teams. She's been included in the top influencers for SharePoint for very many years. She is a consultant for governance and adoption, and she's also an author of several white papers and books and items over the years. She specializes in helping companies collaborate and build solutions to meet their needs. So with that, I would like to introduce what I affectionately refer to as the Queen of Microsoft Governance, Susan Hanley. Susan?
Thanks, Russ. I don't know if I really want to be the queen of anything, but thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I focus on helping businesses be successful with their collaboration and intranet solutions. And obviously, more and more these days, people are collaborating using Microsoft Teams. And because I love the G word, I love helping organizations think through governance. I spent a lot of time trying to think about how to talk about governance, how to explain it, and how to address the aspects of governance that really are not only about sort of things that you build into the technology, but also how you communicate good governance practices, good general practices to your users. And what I'm going to try and share today is a way of thinking about the key decisions that you want to make for governance when it comes to Microsoft Teams, and then how do you communicate those key decisions to your end users so that they understand the what, when, where, and how to apply the decisions that they may need to make, because not all governance can be programmed in. In some cases, you actually have to train people about good practices. So just by way of introduction, I'm coming to you from my home office/gym. And for anyone who's interested, that's a Peloton bike and an elliptical behind my head, and on my door is a TRX. So there you go.
Cool.
Working and playing. All right, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Always a risk. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. Or Russ, am I doing it right? Ah, there we go. Cool. So I don't know if everyone can see not me, but just the screen, or both? Just give me a hint here. That was for you, Russ. There we go. Okay, good. Thank you. And can you hear me okay? Someone reply in the chat. Or Russ, give me a clue.
Sorry, I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure we're all cool from a technology perspective. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Sorry for the delay. So, a good governance plan really helps sort of manage your environment. All these kind of things, avoid sprawl, improve adoption, communicate best practices. It's just a great, you need to have a governance plan to be successful with pretty much any technology. But in addition to all those great business benefits, a governance plan can simplify experiences for your users and admins alike. So you don't have to be afraid of the G word, even if it means applying governance retroactively. Of course, it's always better to start out with a great governance plan. But for many organizations who deployed teams at the start of the pandemic, that ship may have sailed. So I want to take a step back now that we may have a little more time in 2021. Let's see what we need to do to understand governance and maybe get back on track. So the first thing you want to think about when it comes to Microsoft Teams and governance is that Teams is part of a family of applications. So you can't really think about governance for Teams on its own. You really need to think about governance more comprehensively for Teams as it is part of Microsoft 365. And some Teams governance decisions and actions can be built in. So there are decisions that admins can make so that users don't really have a choice about the things that they can do. So are decisions like, can you have guests invited into meetings? That kind of a decision is a critical one for your organization, and there are things that you can block, and that if a user can't do it, they can't do it. On the other hand, there are other decisions that an end user will need to make about, for example, what features to enable in different scenarios from things like Teams sites and meetings. And these decisions are going to need to be communicated to the people who have the opportunity to make them, the meeting owner or a team owner. And they're going to need to know that as part of their training and the communications that you give them about how to use the technology that you've made available to them. So if we're going to think about governance first, or governance after, sort of after that ship has sailed, it really starts with the key decisions that you need to make. And to make those decisions easier, I have been compiling all of the different kinds of decisions that you need to make or you can make about governance for SharePoint, Teams, and Microsoft 365. And I've been keeping them up to date for about the last 10, 15 years for the entire suite, the entire family of applications. And really SharePoint, because I started my work focused mostly on SharePoint and intranets, but also extending to the rest of Microsoft 365. There are a lot of specific Teams decisions, and this framework, which is available at the link in this slide, is on my website. So if you go to susanhanley.com, you can find it there as well. It is, I update it a lot, at least once or twice a month, based on new capabilities that are largely being driven by changes that we can do related to Teams, since things have been moving so quickly. But the idea is that the approach that I recommend actually describes sort of how to set up the right conversation spaces, conversation meetings around governance, who should be part of those decisions. And then I do sort of focus on, here are the decisions you need to make for Teams, here are the things decisions you may need to make for SharePoint and OneDrive and Yammer and anything else I can think of that really will help organizations be successful with Microsoft 365. So one great place to start is by looking at these questions. And the answers to these questions or decisions really depend on the business outcomes that you are trying to solve. The answers are not the same for every organization, and if there were, I'd probably just tell you the answer in that document. But every organization does need to make these decisions, and the key to successful governance really is shared decision making about governance, meaning IT with the business. So you really, if IT makes these decisions alone, they're not always going to be solving the outcome that the business outcomes that the business leaders need to solve. So you really want to have these decisions make these decisions with the right people in the right place at the right time. You know, if you decide you're going to lock everything down, your users are going to find a way. So work is going to find a way of getting done. And so it's always a good idea to make sure we're partnering to make sure that we're not overly locking things down to encourage people to find sort of a shadow IT approach. On the other hand, if we open everything up and anyone can do anything that they want, we may end up with the wild, wild west. And so governance is about a balance. It's about making the right decisions for your organization and understanding what knobs and dials Microsoft gives us to change to vary the degree of what open and close based on our business and regulatory and maturity of our environment. So when it comes to Microsoft Teams, we have to start with the foundation. And the very first decision that you're going to make about governance with Teams is going to come down to Microsoft 365 groups, because groups provide the membership service for Teams. Creating a team means you are creating a group. Group identity is maintained in Azure AD, and policies are applied to the group. And the group provides all the related services for the team. So when I create a team, I am going to get a Microsoft 365 group. That group is going to provision on my behalf a SharePoint team site, a OneNote notebook living in that SharePoint team site. It's in Site Assets if you want to go look for it, a planner board, and it'll give me an email and calendar for that team. And so when you are making your first decision that you want to make for Microsoft Teams is actually a decision that will be shared with all the other applications that rely on Microsoft 365 groups. And that's usually going to come down to who can create. So almost always the first decision we're going to make is about provisioning. And so what I'm going to do is sort of talk through these building blocks, the key decisions for Microsoft Teams, provisioning, who's allowed to create them. And when you make that decision, you're going to share that decision with Yammer, for example. So if you choose to say that only a select number of people can create a team, you're actually saying who can create a Microsoft 365 group. And if you're going to lock it down, you will, by definition, also be locking down Yammer. So if you're going to do that, totally fine. You just have to understand the implications for the rest of the family. We'll talk about naming, guest access, expiration, configuration, compliance, moderating, and then finally, how are you going to tell people about all these decisions? And honestly, I think the first part is much easier than the last part. And I want to show you how I have been thinking about governance for the last 15 years and sort of how to talk to people about governance. And I'll just give you one clue. The answer isn't a document. All right, so these decisions are going to be implemented by admins, but they're going to impact end users, and therefore you don't want to make these decisions in isolation. Russ mentioned this earlier, but please, 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 if you do have any questions, I'm not going to be able to pay much attention to the Q&A, but Russ is going to interrupt me if someone has a question. So I'm looking forward to engaging. The worst part about these kind of sessions is that I can't see you and you can see me, and so I'm not getting much feedback. So questions really, really help. Comments too, actually. All right. So first decision you're going to want to make is who can create a team. And it seems really great to open up the creation of a team. But remember, when users have too many teams, they can really get overwhelmed. On the other hand, locking down who can create a team means that you create an opening for shadow IT. So if you're going to lock down teams and determine and restrict who can create a group, you need to be prepared for a rapid turnaround from whatever your provisioning request process is going to be. One of the advantages of limiting who can create a team is that you're less likely to get duplicated teams because you will have some control over that, or you are or new teams when what you really need is a new channel. So you have a little bit more control over that. So limiting helps control sprawl. It helps ensure consistency. That's the other really nice advantage, is that if you have an environment where you have not sort of reached sort of a level of team's maturity where everyone knows how to choose a template or what they're going to want to do with a team, limiting how they are created allows you to interject some training at the moment of provisioning and encourage some consistency. On the other hand, if you open provisioning, I'm not so sure any kittens are going to die. I think there is clearly an opportunity to leave provisioning of teams open, but you are going to want to think about, if anyone can create a team, how are you going to apply governance after the fact? What will you do when someone creates a team to make sure that they know, here are our best practices. Oops, did you choose the wrong kind of a name for your team? Here's what you need to know. So again, you don't have to block everything in the beginning, but if you do leave it open, you should have a process that immediately kicks in and sends the team creator resources and information that they're going to need in order to be successful. So again, we don't have to lock everything down. We can definitely open things up, but governance is going to happen either before or after, and always ongoing. So here, that provisioning is kind of the first and most important decision you're going to have to make. Second thing you want to think about is naming conventions. Teams share a namespace with all of your other SharePoint sites, and that means that you're going to share a namespace or URL space with your intranet as well. So you want to think about who's going to make a land grab for the name. One of the things I've seen a lot is that the first team, Microsoft team that gets created, is IT creates one from themselves, and they create a team called IT. And then later you decide, oh, it's time to move our intranet, or take our classic intranet and move it to modern, or now we're going to build a new intranet in Microsoft 365, and you want to create a place for IT to communicate to the rest of the organization, but sites/IT isn't available because the team got created with that name. And so if you're not careful when you're provisioning that intranet site, the URL is going to be IT2, and you definitely don't want that. So one thing you do want to think about is, do we want to either enforce or encourage naming conventions for our teams? And that problem, by the way, for IT could have been solved if we had a naming convention that says stick the word team or something that indicates that this is a collaborative space in the name of the team. So then that way, IT team is the team site, or the team, Microsoft team, for the IT group, and site/IT could be the name for the communication site. So as I said, the first, whoever does it first makes a land grab for the URL. And so you can control group naming and add a standard prefix or a standard suffix to your team's creation. And that is, it requires an Azure AD Premium P1 license, but doing this is going to, if you're going to do open provisioning, this will help you prevent the conflict of namespace. Remember that you actually the team name can be changed by the team owner once it's created, but that's not going to change the URL for the SharePoint site that goes with the team. And so naming is a critical and important decision that you'll want to make for the organization. So options, you can do the prefix suffix thing if you like. You can also indicate some custom blocked words, or you can just provide guidance that says, hey, this is what you should and shouldn't be naming your team. And actually, I've worked in organizations where they do all of the above. And if you have enough controls in the creation process or the provisioning process or the review process after teams are created, they all work. It just depends on how you want to spend your calories. How's that? So then another key decision that you're going to make for Microsoft Teams is who can be members of a team. And it starts at the tenant, because if you block external sharing in Azure AD, as some of my clients do, doesn't really matter because no one's going to be able to invite a guest to a team. But assuming that it's open at the tenant level, then you're going to want to make some individual decisions about who can add guests. Can guests be added to groups in general? Can guests be added to teams? Can guests be added to SharePoint? And the other one I like to think about is what kind of file sharing link do we want to enable by default, from at least on the SharePoint side. I always recommend on team collaboration, it should be people with existing access or by default, and then you can subsequently choose what kind of file sharing link that you want to use. But in general, in addition to provisioning, the team that we need to create, we also need to think about who can be a member. So another sort of key part of the admin decisions that you want to make about teams. And again, there is no right or wrong answer. It depends on what is most appropriate for your organization. Next decision you're going to want to make is about how are we going to expire teams? Do we want to automate this, or do we want to let teams sort of live and we'll use some manual process or a third-party tool to help us do it? If you have open provisioning, meaning anyone can create a team, you're going to want to have some way of closing down teams that are not used, because that is about the only way you're going to get any manageability in your environment. And you'll find that if it's open, people are going to create teams and abandon them, not realizing that they're creating an artifact that is going to be retained until they choose to delete it. And so groups that are actively used can be auto-renewed, and that's a great approach to make sure you're not bothering people who are actually using their team. And then if they're not actually being used, you can trigger a process that says, hey, you're at 180 days or whatever the number of days is that is appropriate for your organization, you can then trigger the automatic archiving or deletion of teams that are not being used. And so one thing I would recommend is you probably want to think about being careful about auto expiring teams if you don't have a retention policy, because what you're going to want to make sure is that if you have that your retention policy will kick in even if you've auto expired your team. So in other words, you need retention first, and then you can turn on auto expiration to make sure that you are not accidentally deleting something that needs to be preserved. So all of this really needs to be thought about in concert, which is why really IT shouldn't be making these decisions without understanding what the business requirements are for document retention. I'm going to take a little breath here and see if there are any questions. Russ, do we have any questions?
There's a couple of comments. I haven't seen any questions.
Okay. Any comments I need to know about?
Well, okay, so there's just why is creating a team also showing the group in Outlook still?
That is going to be turned off really soon. There was just an announcement this week that you will know when you create a team, no matter how you create it. Right now, there are some ways of creating a team that don't trigger it showing in Outlook, and pretty soon they will all be aligned. So creating a Microsoft team, capital T team, will not show in Outlook.
Okay, there's another one. I'm not sure. This is a question. In the admin center, I have locked down created SP site, any site created default to teams/exec. So if the naming standard is a prefix, teams would duplicate it. Team/team IT.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is you're choosing a path. Your default is /teams. You can do that, and then you wouldn't want a prefix that has team IT. I think you're more likely going to end up leaving your path as /sites. I guess that's not really true. It depends on whether you're doing open provisioning or closed. If you are doing open provisioning, you're almost going to have it. You could leave it at /teams, but then when you provision a communication site, you're going to want to make sure that that provision's in /sites because it isn't a team. And so you have to be really, really careful. So in most large organizations that I've worked with, we flip it so that in the admin center, all sites are created with /sites. And then we do need the word team in the name somewhere to make sure we don't get the URL. That we don't make a land grab for a URL we might not want for an intranet communications site. So in that case, all sites would be /sites. and then you do care about it that. And I wouldn't necessarily use the word team in the beginning. I actually prefer it as a suffix rather than a prefix. So IT team, not team IT, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers the question.
Another question.
Sure.
Any way to just expire teams rather than all Office 365 groups?
Anyway, well, again, teams are based on groups, and there are things that teams have that are provisioned because they are a group. So you need to take it as a whole. And so all groups should have an opportunity to be expired. If a Yammer group isn't being used, if a stream group isn't being used. So I'm not sure why. I'd have to really think about a scenario in which you wouldn't want to consider that. I don't know, Russ, can you think of anything?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Another question was, can you restore auto remove groups?
Within 30 days, but if you forget, if you don't have a retention, so retention rules always take precedence over the auto deletion or any kind of deletion actually. And so after 30 days, no, it's gone forever. So that's really why you want to consider retention first. Anything else?
I'm looking through.
Okay.
That means you can recover the team within 31 days after deletion.
I think it's 30 days. You're asking that. I don't know the exact date, but it's 30. So within 30 is what I'm pretty sure it is.
I think that's it.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've covered now expiration. All right, so now you have some other options. One thing, there are implications for all of these decisions. And again, you want to make sure that you're considering the best thing for your organizations. So one thing I like to do is make sure that my environment has, if we've thought through sort of different kinds of teams, then I think we should now take advantage of the ability to create a template so that when we create a new team, everybody's not starting from scratch on figuring out what are the right channels, what's the best approach for me for organizing my content. So I'm working with an organization right now that has decided that for every sales pursuit, they want to make sure that the channels in the team are at least there's a basic bare minimum number of channels and that they're named and created consistently. So then when someone works on multiple pursuits, they don't have to jump into the team and go, I wonder how these guys are thinking about organizing their content. In that case, actually, this is not a difficult thing to do. What you want to do is make sure that you have a template for a sales pursuit so that each time I create a team to support one of those activities, I've got that common structure set up to ensure consistency and basically take away the burden of having to rethink everything every single time. So there's other things that we can choose to do. We can decide what applications we want to include, what apps we want to include by default, what apps we want to give individual users the ability to do. And then within each team, there are all kinds of features that we need to decide as an organization, what kind of features do we want to include by default. And remember that there also are decisions that individual team owners can make for their teams. But you as an organization can turn off or on many of these features in the admin center so that the team owner doesn't always have to think about it. So you can think about, can users create private channels in Teams? I'm working in an organization right now where the concept of a private channel was not explained very clearly. And very quickly, and here's why it was very, very confusing, because they have you need to make a request to create a team. So the creation of a team is locked down. But once you have a team, people are able to create private channels. And so rather than requesting a new team, that the business users thought it was much easier not to ask IT every time they needed a new team. And their IT department made it sound like asking for a team was going to be denied on occasion. So they said, oh, good, we have this main team. Let's just create a private channel every time we need a private space. Well, they very quickly ran out of opportunities to do that because you are limited to 30 private channels per team. What they actually needed was additional teams. But because governance and training go together, and you can't just lock things down without providing people with education about how do I know when I need a new team, how do I know when I need a new channel, you are going to you could very easily get into the scenario that these guys did, which is using channels when they really needed to use teams, and then saying, wait, this is really bad because we can only have 30 private channels, we can't get our work done. And so one way to avoid that is to make sure that you're very clearly communicating about, and you have a really good SLA and turnaround about creating new teams. So you want to think about who can create a private channel. Is that the best option in our organization? What kind of meeting policies do we want by default? What can members do? What can guests do? And again, you have a lot of knobs and dials that you can turn. What I really recommend is that you use those governance questions to think through the governance questions list, each one of the decisions that you can make in the admin center. And as I said, there's no right or wrong answer. What you want to do is have a conversation to think about, what is the level of maturity of the people in our organization, and what is our environment like, our business environment like, so that you can determine what makes sense for our organization. For example, there are things that you can restrict in chats and messages like Giphies and memes and stickers. For some organizations, that's totally fine to leave everything open. And for others, locking that down might be more appropriate. So it really depends. You may want to have guidance that goes along with it saying, be careful about using Giphies in a team that includes partners and customers or things like that. And so again, things that you can restrict, some things you can restrict in a team, and some things you're going to make a decision for your organization as a whole. I'm going to take a little breath, just make sure there's no questions. Got anything, Russ?
Yeah, it's the templates in A1.
In what?
A1.
I don't know what A1 is.
Licensing.
I don't know what an A1 license is.
They mean F1.
Yeah, that actually I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't know what A1 is. Maybe I can research that. Yeah, let me take a note to look that up. Templates. Yeah, A1, something I've never heard of. Okay. Anything else?
No.
Okay. I'm going to just tell you that anyone outside of Microsoft, even people inside of Microsoft, are not going to be able to tell you exactly what's included in each license without looking it up. And I am 100% not a licensing expert.
There are a couple other questions.
Sure.
How to communicate teams governance, IT and functional decision, if it is through a document.
Oh, I'm going to say, I'll get to that. Give me a chance.
Yeah.
I'm going to get there in a couple of slides. I'll tell you how I do it. And again, I'm not an expert on the answers, but I can basically tell you what questions you need to ask. And when I work on a governance engagement with a client, what I try to do is facilitate the conversation. And where I can often help is clients will say to me, well, how do other organizations make this particular decision? And I can say, well, in this kind of an organization, they made this decision this way. In this kind of an organization, they decided not to do X, Y, and Z. And here's why they made those decisions. But the more important thing, I think, is actually to have those conversations and to think about what you can and should lock down or open up based on the needs of your organizations. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think a key decision that you are going to want to make in general is about what kind of data retention policies are required for Teams and Teams chat. I'm working in an organization right now where one-to-one chat messages, the organization has decided that one-to-one chat messages are going to be auto-deleted after 30 days. Channel messages, however, are retained with the team itself. And so what that is doing is really forcing the people in the organization to choose where they have a conversation. And it is critical, of course, to communicate that information so that you're not having a conversation in one-to-one chat and expecting to be able to find it after day 31. All of these kind of decisions are, again, the kind of decisions you want to make to ensure that your use of Microsoft Teams is successful. Coming very soon, the retention policies are also going to cover messages in private channels. And so right now, retention did not cover private channels, and by March of 2021, retention for private channel messages is also going to be available. So you also want to think about, oh, by the way, so emails and files that you use in Microsoft Teams aren't part of the Teams retention policy. They're covered by the Exchange and SharePoint retention policies. So they have their own retention policies that also come into play. And all of that is sort of why, that is really why you want to think about Teams governance much more holistically, because Teams is part of a family. And while it has some capabilities that you can manage from Teams alone, it is also relying on its sibling applications to support some of the activities going on there. So all of these, again, are key decisions that you're going to want to think about to effectively manage your teams. Another thing you're going to want to do is think about how are you going to monitor what's going on in your teams. It's really a good idea to do this to make sure that you are looking at how engaged are the people in the organization. Are we getting benefit from what we're seeing? Just to give you an overall picture of what's happening in Microsoft Teams. So one, there are some aspects of monitoring to support ongoing review that are available in the admin center. So there's monitoring and information that you can learn at the admin center level. And then there's also some great information that as a team owner, you can see what's going on in my team, what channels are active, what channels are inactive. So there's a lot of information available to the team owners and members about the activities going on in a team. And again, the more you know about what's happening in your teams, the better you can govern what is going on, the better you can see what's going on so that you can actually do something about it. So that kind of covers the basic categories of decisions that you'll want to make about teams. I want to make sure that I want to see if there's any questions about this before I jump into how can you talk about this to your end users. So any sort of decision related questions before I move on to the next thing?
Just one thing is the A1 is education.
Okay. Thank you for that. And my answer for that one is I do not know much about education licensing, but I can look it up while Russ is talking. All right, so I want to talk about thankfully I did get a question about, well, how are you going to tell this to everybody when you're not going to present it in a document? So let me first talk a little bit about what is the goal about communicating all of this to end users. One is that you are 100% going to not try and shout all of this information to them at one time. We are not attempting to have people's heads explode. I do think it's really helpful to create sort of getting started with Teams resource guides. I think you can start with the ones that are available from Microsoft, but make sure that what you find online actually applies to your organization. I almost always see organizations adapting what Microsoft provides to reflect the decisions that they made. And I think that's really important. Be really careful about using tons and tons of screenshots in your guides unless you are prepared to keep them up to date. Because things change about what is available and what it looks like relatively frequently in Microsoft Teams. And you're going to want to make sure that you're staying ahead of that so that your users are aware when you're giving someone a guide that it matches their expectations. So my clients have been really, really successful with short, targeted, quick start guides. The other thing I think you can do is leverage the Microsoft Learning Pathways SharePoint site to adapt, to create a training experience for Microsoft Teams. You're going to get some terrific training playlists curated for you in Learning Pathways, but you can also create your own and incorporate your own quick start guides and your own videos and your own training in those playlists. So I highly recommend that you think about creating your own experience and adding that to Microsoft Learning Pathways if you're going to use that solution in your tenant. And again, if you create that, you can add it. You could add it as an app in Microsoft Teams, or you can add it in your standard Teams template. You can have a tab that in the general channel for every new team that points to Teams onboarding or quick start training. So yeah, definitely link to training in your templates. The other thing to think about is that many times people want to learn in real time. They're not super interested in a lot of training until they have a need to know. So I think you should think about offering recurring training opportunities on a real-time basis. You record them so that they can be watched later. But everyone has a different way of learning. I need to ask questions in order to learn most effectively, and I need to try things. I'm very much a kinesthetic learner. I don't do very well when I have to teach myself something. I do really well when someone will spend some time where I can try something and then ask questions to whoever knows more about it than I do. And I think you want to think about the fact that everyone in your organization learns slightly differently and create as many opportunities as you can support to ensure that people can be both successful and comfortable and get the information and training they need at the time that they need it. If it is business critical, again, you want to block things that are going to cause harm to the organization, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't communicate them to your users. And so, as I said, I don't think a governance document is going to help anybody. Typically, this is what a governance document looks like. It is a very large a big fat document. And what's the problem with that big fat document? Well, you know what? No one wants to read it. And forget about wanting to read it. No one does read it. I find people don't read anything greater than 2 pages. And as a result, you have this great document where you've documented all these decisions. And as a result, what you end up with is very unhappy users, frustrated and unhappy users. So what I think we want to do is build a user resource center, a destination that applies both how to do things in all of our Microsoft 365 technologies, not just Teams, with how should you do them and why you should do them, why you should do certain activities for Teams and all of Microsoft 365. Ideally, we want to deliver this just in time in the moment that you're actually doing work. And by the way, Microsoft is doing a really good job at delivering training just in time. But now how are we going to deliver our governance just in time? There are certain capabilities when you try to email a document that has protection on it, you'll get notified in the moment. So there are ways to communicate in the moment. But I think oftentimes when people are creating teams, they want to know, well, what's a good way to do this and how should I be thinking about it? And for that, I'm going to make a sacrifice to the demo gods and hope that this is going to work. So let me share with you, while I'm doing this and praying, Russ, you can just sort of take a look and see if we have any questions. And I am going to see if I can flip to my demo.
Okay, so while you're doing that, obviously we're still getting the echo.
Okay.
What happens in the case of conflicting rules across retention policies? Which takes precedence? If, for example, a Teams policy conflicts with a SharePoint policy, which will apply to content stored in Teams?
There's no team, again, the SharePoint policy is going to affect documents. The SharePoint policy on your documents, there isn't going to be able to be a conflict. If you delete a team and there is retention on an asset in the team, the retention policy wins. Does that?
Great.
Hopefully that answers the question. So retention is going to override everything in general. So if you've got a policy in place, it will be respected. All right, I'm hoping that everyone can now see my screen. And for me, the way to deliver training and governance is to do it from the perspective of the user, so they have a place that they can go to learn about what training is available to them, what governance policies are required of them. Now, how you would use this, in many cases, this is a SharePoint site, by the way, and I always create these sites in all of my intranet solutions. And the real question is, do people go here or are they referred here in the moment by a support person or someone that they're working with in IT? And the answer is yes, all of the above. So what I want to create is a destination. This is very similar. The User Resource Center is similar to Microsoft Learning Pathways in the sense that I have a lot of integration with that same content. If I didn't already have this site, I might actually use the Microsoft Learning Pathways site as a way to create it. But I've been creating these since way before Learning Pathways existed. So instead, what I've done is integrate Learning Pathways for the training part of my User Resource Center. And what I want to do is create a place where a user can come to learn more about the tools that they are being handed to them to get their work done. And I don't want to provide just training. I want to really provide sort of how do you think about this and what are best practices for using it. And so I want to, rather than calling it a governance center, which is what I used to do, I want to make, I don't want it to be just about the G word. I want it to be about the value word, value for the end user. And again, because we have blocked anything that is going to harm the organization or harm the information or harm you, what's left for me to explain are the key decisions that you as an end user, as a team owner, or as a team member need to be aware of in order to be successful. And so my audience for the User Resource Center are the owners of teams as well as the users of teams. And one place, the place where I'm going to create the content is 100% in SharePoint. How I deliver the content, however, is going to be, it can be in Microsoft Teams, because I can bring this entire solution in as an app in Teams. And once I have the Microsoft, the home site app for Teams, which is really part of what was just announced last week as Microsoft Viva Connections, I will be able to bring my intranet into Teams and have a wholly contained and navigational experience. And I think I may not need to deliver the User Resource Center as an app, because it will be part of the intranet that can be experienced inside Teams. So I hope hopefully that was clear. The idea is that I want to basically create a place where you can both point people to, or people can come to learn more information. So in my case, I've basically done all the good things that you should do when you're designing a SharePoint site. I've tried to think about who my users are and what they might want to do, what is most important to them. And as a baseline, I'm starting with sort of the basic file naming, file things that people care about. From a Teams perspective, I've got sort of what are the key actions that people might want to learn about. So one is sort of getting started with Teams. Now, let me just show you an example on a sort of a simple example. So how should I name my files? The premise of this solution is that it is basically a modern SharePoint site where every single topic gets a page. And so I am not trying to deliver a document that's meant to be read linearly. I'm really trying to create a very searchable and browsable experience where, for the most part, the content is delivered in one screen full of information.
And all of the text is written in a way that we know is a good practice for skimming and scanning, because that's what people do online. They don't read every word. So notice how I'm using heading text and bold to draw your eye to the content that's most important. To make it super easy to find content on a page, I've got a little table of contents at the top of every page, and these are anchor links or jump links to this section of a page where the key content is. This is a really great feature if you've never tried it in SharePoint Online, because every time you use header text, you get an automatic anchor link that you can just grab the link and then paste that into either a quick links web part, or just use it as a hyperlink over text, which is what I'm doing here, to create a table of contents for longer pages. And so ideally, you want your pages to be short, consumable chunks of information, but when they're longer, and even if they're not, giving someone a quick way to scan what the page is about and then jump to it makes it really handy. Now, one of the things you get with a document is that you can collect related information together, and I'm breaking everything up in my user resource center. The way to put it back together is to say, hey, while you're on this page learning about file naming, you might be interested in some other topics related to documents or files, how to restore deleted files, how to use metadata, how to upload a document. And the way that I do this uses the highlighted content web part. Let me put the page in edit mode. And I have 4 pieces of metadata on every page in my solution. I have every page has associated with it. I'll show you in a minute what it is. But in this case, I'm saying, hey, while you're on this page, find any other page where the topic is about documents. So this is a dynamic web part. Every time I add a new page, it will automatically show up in the family. So if this was a document, it would be building itself dynamically. As I said, every page has 4 pieces of metadata. What type of page are you? Are you the description of someone's role? Are you describing an app in general? Are you a summary of sort of training kind of things? Or are you basic guidance, which is my default? What are you about? And I have a collection of topics to choose from. Which service do you apply to, or which app do you apply to? In this case, again, because I'm tagging every document with 4 pieces of metadata, I can roll things up in different ways using these metadata properties. So who are you for? What are you about? What do you apply to? And then what kind of a page are you? And that just allows me to do my filters in a variety of different ways. So with every page tagged with those 4 pieces of metadata, I can actually create a Teams page that rolls in all the content that we have about Microsoft Teams in a single place. And so this allows me to create different stories about different content related to whichever service in whatever application in Microsoft 365 someone is curious about. And the reason I want this to be in one place, not just about Microsoft Teams, is because Teams is actually a front door to a lot of other applications in the suite. And by creating my content in this way, it allows me to create reuse content in different contexts, which is another thing you can't do with a document. With a document, you either write one big giant document that I have to go find the part related to me, and it's very difficult to sort of jump around and tell stories in different ways. This allows me to pull in document related content when I'm writing about Microsoft Teams, because there are files that you may actually store associated with your team. So basically, so the way I am communicating about governance is not necessarily to create a document, but to deliver it in a reusable asset that effectively is, at the end of the day, it's a SharePoint site that I can now deliver this in a variety of ways. So I will take a little break before I return to my slides to kind of wrap everything up. So any questions?
Have you had any experience with organizations that are bent on providing customized training with internally built PowerPoints versus leveraging evergreen Microsoft content. We have that situation and looking to change the corporate mindset.
I think it's risky to do that kind of thing. And I think the reason it's risky is because we are using cloud platforms that change. That being said, I already said, I do think that there are cases where you do want something that is very bespoke to your organization. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it may be both and. On all of these places in my user resource center, I am linking to Microsoft content all over the place. Microsoft Teams training, I have a curated collection. I haven't created any of these. However, if my organization had something very specific, I would 100% embed it or add it to this page so that you've got one of the advantages of your custom content is that you can explain both how to and how should in the same context. So I think it is important, by the way, if you're not going to allow some of these capabilities, to not refer to them and to create a way that doesn't talk about them to your end users. So that's one of the reasons I like creating my own user resource center. And I think it's really combining your bespoke content with what is basic from Microsoft. Like, I don't want to have to write the documentation about how to upload a file. I think that we can go get that from Microsoft. But what I do want to do is I don't want to tell you how to upload a file, give you training on that without first saying, hey, are you uploading in the right place? And have you named your file in a meaningful way? And once I know you've done all that, sure, here, go to this asset to learn how to upload your file. So I think it's the same way with virtually any kind of training content.
There's another question regarding team ownership. Microsoft was going to push out something to help with team ownership, helping require 2 owners for each team. He said somebody said it would be available in the spring Ignite. Is this happening? We are struggling to keep 2 owners for each team, so they have many orphan teams.
That's a good question. I don't know what Microsoft is going to do to sort of require that, but I do know that there are some governance tools that you can use to quickly and easily identify teams that have been abandoned. Yeah. So Syskit, ShareGate, Apricot are just 2 that immediately come to mind. Russ, you probably are aware of some as well.
Yeah. So I mean, partly it depends on how. You can see that inside of your team's interface, at least how many owners are assigned. So, in terms of identifying it, that's one way to keep tabs on it. At the same time, if you got, tens of thousands of teams, it's unmanageable. There is a PowerShell script that you can use to ensure that there's always 2 teams assigned. And essentially what we've done in the past is basically, and it depends on the client. We've run that script on a monthly basis where it goes out, and anywhere that there's not 2 teams assigned, it notifies the remaining owner on the site and notifies IT. If you don't, depending on the number of teams that you have and everything, I know another client that's basically just running that script on a quarterly basis. So that's one way of doing it. I think you can also do it as like as either a Power Automate or an Azure app, but I haven't done that with either of them.
Okay. All right, so hopefully that answers your question. So again, here's my demo fail backup slide. But the net result on all of this is you want to create single focused pages, write them for the reader, make them as short as you can, and then use metadata to connect them. And I have a link in the resources slide that I'll show you in a minute of how you can think about creating that user resource center for yourself. So as I said, the most important way to deliver this content is to not make people go looking for it. And I think that's really what the whole concept of Microsoft Viva is all about, is bringing knowledge and information to you in the flow of your work. I try to do that as well. And one way to do that is to bring the app or the Teams Resource Center, that collection of assets about Microsoft Teams, you can bring in any SharePoint page to your team template, and that will always put your sort of key governance information into every single team. The other thing I've done is I've brought my entire User Resource Center into Teams as an app. This can't be very difficult to do since I was able to do it. However, bringing in a SharePoint site in as an app in Teams, you do lose your top navigation, but it will work. And so that's another option as well. The whole idea is to bring all of this governance content to people, governance and training content to people at the moment that they need it. I think the last way we're going to sort of bring all this content into the flow of where people work is when you bring your intranet into Teams. All of this is going to land in March, which is really 1 month away, March of this year. So we're talking about what used to be referred to as the home site app in Teams, which I believe now is part of Microsoft Viva, still not Viva Connections. I'm still trying to figure out if that means that home site app in Teams, or you can do one without the other. But I think we'll know more at Microsoft Ignite. But the idea is the more you can bring your experiences into the applications that people are using every day, the more opportunity you have for those experiences to drive value to your end users. And ultimately, that is the goal.
There's another question.
Sure.
So we have many external guests and need to moderate chats. Is there any way to moderate them before they are actually posted?
I'm not aware of the ability to moderate a chat in Teams prior to posting. I know that on the Yammer side for live events, there is going to be a capability. I don't think it's been rolled out yet to moderate, to sort of pre-review things before they post. I believe that is happening, but I am not aware of that capability. All right, so here's what we've talked about, the different kind of admin things you can do, the different kind of user, both admin governance, user governance, and the one thing that everybody needs to think about, these are the key decisions that and impacts that you're going to need to focus on for Microsoft Teams. But there's one more important thing to keep in mind, and that is change. Everything from your users and the platform on which you are collaborating is changing on a rapid basis. Changes to Teams, changes to the training that you provide, and updated governance decisions as more and more capabilities are brought to the forefront that you can then control. So I'm going to commit to keep updating those the governance decision document, so you can always reach out to that document. But you need to commit to paying attention to the Microsoft roadmap and the message center and blogs and social media, so that you will know when it's time to update your key decisions and content. So critically important to do that. And finally, there's a bunch of resources that I will make this information available, including how to create the Governance and Training User Resource Center. And Russ, I'll make sure that you have this slide so that you can post all these various links, which no longer paste with the URL. But these are sort of the key things that I've talked about, the key places in docs.microsoft.com where you can find more information about the governance decisions for Teams. And if you have any additional questions, here are all the various ways that you can contact me.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. Great job.
Thanks.
There are still some questions coming in.
Sure.
Some of them I'm just going to let you go through and respond directly to.
Okay.
But I think we covered most of them that are there, but you might want to take a peek there.
Okay.
Folks, so I was having some issues with the echo. I'm not sure exactly what was causing it, but apparently we're not getting the echo any longer. At least I'm not hearing it, so I think that's a good thing. And so I part of what I had to do as a result of that is jump out of another session that I was logged into. Not sure if that was what caused the issue or not. It seemed not to be, because I was continuing to hear the echo afterwards. But anyway, one of the demos, and really the primary demo that I was doing, was on that machine. So I'm going to try and get back in there. But let's take just maybe a 5-minute bio break for everybody, and then we'll get back in and finish up. Okay, let's get started again. So just a little bit about my background. So I've been doing SharePoint since before it was SharePoint. I've really got involved with what was product code Tahoe back in around 1999, and that eventually became SharePoint 2001 and all. So kind of showing my age with this stuff, but I've been involved with it ever since then. I've stayed involved with the community. I ran the Philly SharePoint user groups, and just done a lot of different things over the years. So, you know, I enjoy being involved with the community and doing activities like today. I put this slide in just as an introduction. This is actually one of the slides that you saw from Sue's deck, and I thought it really kind of captured some of the key points that are important and some of the demos and all that I want to just kind of at least give you eyes on the capabilities today. So, you know, just as a way of summing it up, the one demo that one of the demos that I have is around provisioning your teams and how some custom options for you that gives you a little bit more manageability over that. And with that, we can address some of the things as part of that provisioning process, like having, you know, requiring multiple owners on a team. So I'm going to try and walk you through that. That's the one that's on the other laptop. So hopefully that the demo gods there cooperate with me. So just overall, I thought Sue did a great job in, talking about governance in general. One of the ways that I just really look at it is, and I've heard people refer to it in different ways. To me, it's guidance that you're providing to your organization. I've seen some companies really go crazy with it in terms of locking things down that where nobody could use anything. And, it's really, that's kind of going too far with it. You really want to kind of just provide those guide rails to help people answer, get the answers they need, but to keep them engaged, keep them responding, keep them using the environment of Teams. So you really want to not let it grow completely organically, but limit the amount of controls that you put on it to things that do not have that do not hinder them from using the tools. So really, enable that collaboration across the teams. And, a lot of the stuff that Microsoft has provided and that's available now, gives you a lot of capabilities to do that and to, keep encouraging them to interact on your platform. And one of the things around the training two pieces, what you want to do is show them how to be productive on the environment. Show them how to use Teams and continuously feeding them, spoon feeding them information about it, little tips, little tricks on a regular basis in a way that's not intrusive, but on something that where they can see a constant flow of information coming out, as opposed to, the way we historically had done training, that where you sit people in a room or even sit them in an online class for hours on end to teach them all about it. It's better to get them using it and, learn it through that way, and then, keep spoon feeding them information about other capabilities. And I think, Susan's Resource Center was a great way to plug that in to your organization. But, definitely don't want to lock it down. We're just going to kind of show you how to put some guardrails or guidelines in place. Actually, I'm not crazy word about guardrails. So, it sounds like you're preventing them from doing something. And you really want to kind of just put guidelines in place to, help keep them on course so they don't end up hurting themselves with it. So what I want to talk through is 5 specific ways and show you some of these capabilities. And, Susan touched on the majority of these, so I just want to kind of touch on them real quick. But first thing I want to walk you through is the capabilities that SharePoint gives you from a policies perspective. And Teams gives you in terms of your policies. Microsoft's really put some things in place that act as, I'll call them placeholders at this point, that where you can establish a policy to start putting those guidelines in place. But you can also tell that there's more features that are coming around each of those. So, each of these areas here, the Teams policies, the meetings, the messaging, the app permissions, I foresee that there's going to be a lot of enhancements coming through them, but it gives you a way to standardize, a policy and apply it based on who the users are. And so I'll show you some of that. And also there's actually policy packages that are available for it, so that if you have a group like your first line workers and you want to apply that specifically to that group of users that are your first line workers or frontline workers, you can do that using the policies inside of Teams with the policy packages. So we're going to jump in and take a look at that. This is the provisioning piece. Sue covered a lot of it, but this is creating that balance between that open collaboration, that where it's just like anybody can do anything, but at the same time, putting some of those basic controls and security pieces in place. And through an automated provisioning process, you can do things like, at least when they're setting the team up, require the multiple team owners on it. You can have them do things like set the sensitivity label that's going to be used as part of that. You can enforce naming conventions. You can give them the capability to choose from approved templates as opposed to just using what's out of the box. So it gives you the capability to customize different pieces of that process. And the workflows that are involved in it can feed off of the information that you collect as you go through that provisioning process. So there's forms that I'll show you that allow you to collect information about the team that they want to create. So a couple of the things are mentioned here, but you can collect things like what's the business justification for it. What's the department that it's associated with it? What's the division that it's associated with it? And basically, as they're filling out that information, use that to plug in to the actual provisioning of the sites and do things like include it in the naming convention or set sensitivity labels on it as the site is provisioned, so that essentially that happens up front as opposed to trying to swing back and doing it afterwards. So that's the one with the demo and all in it. Sue talked a lot about the owner management. What I wanted to really just add is, I already mentioned that, you can, in the admin center, the Teams admin center, as you look at your list of teams in there, at least you have a visibility to the number of owners that are assigned to a team. And you always want to make sure that you have 2 owners assigned to every team. But there are scripts and workflows that you can use to do it. I mentioned earlier that we have, different clients that are, running them based on the volume of sites that they have within their environment. So, if you don't have a ton of sites, you can run it more frequently. But I think the one client, I think they've got like 30 or 40,000 teams that are created. So they actually run it on a quarterly basis because it takes time to go through that. So I'll show you I'll show you some of that when we jump over there. Oh, actually, this is the screen. So this is from inside of the Teams admin center. So you can see this one site doesn't have any owners assigned, but you can at least see how many owners are. So, again, if you have, a manageable number that you can scroll through and see, you can at least gives you visibility, but it's still a manual process. And that's the issue with what's available right now for this. So, by creating the scripts, using those scripts, which I'll share also afterwards, it helps you automate that part of the process. Sue talked a lot about the group expirations. It gives you the renewal periods on it so that users get notified at 30 days, 15 days, or 1 day prior to the group expiration. Once it expires, it does remove the site and all of the information associated with it, but there is capability to restore it for up to 30 days. So it is initially just a soft delete before it becomes permanent. And in order to keep a site active, it just has to have some type of activity in. So if any member actually visits that site, there's a chat, any type of activity along it, it'll basically keep that open and not, automatically renew it. So without having to have a team owner involved in it. So that's what it's based off of, is the level of activity going on in the site. And the last thing I want to talk about a little today is around sensitivity labels. And the sensitivity labels give you the capability to classify your information. And sensitivity labels can be used throughout Microsoft 365. But you can also use them on Teams and on SharePoint content, on chats, so that based on the sensitivity of the information, you can do things like drive the retention policies and all on it. So I was going to show you some of that. So with that, this is the setup screen for it, but I'm going to jump over into the demo environment that I was using to at least give you kind of a look at it. So let me pull that up here real quick. So, okay, so the first thing we were talking about was the group naming, and just to kind of give you access for this. So the group naming conventions, all that capability is stored in the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. And as that loads, if you select Azure Active Directory on the left-hand side, and you go down to groups, it brings up the list of, groups, Office 365 groups that are in the environment. But on the left here, you have two capabilities. You have your naming policy and you have your expiration for these groups. And so I'll start with the naming policy capabilities, but in here, you can basically define, first of all, a list of blocked words. So you can download the ones that are, set by default, but you can then add to them if there's any type of words that might be sensitive for your organization or that are specific for your industry that you don't want to have included in group names, team names. You can basically block them with that capability. So you download the file, add it in, and then upload it back again, and it'll block that portion of the name. But the group naming policy itself is very quickly, easily defined. And I've seen organizations do it different ways, and that's why the capability is there. But I do not like when they use prefixes on it. I prefer them to basically assign anything that they want to have standardized as part of the suffix. And it's just because of readability that when you're inside of Teams and you're looking down your left rail at the list of teams that are there, if everything starts with US _East _sales, the end of the name gets cut off and you can't see it. So I prefer to have clients flip it around the other way and have them start with what their site name is, and then anything else that they want to put in as part of their standard to add it in as a suffix. But each company decides what's right for them. But as part of this, you can add your prefix in here, and you can select either an attribute or a string. So attribute coming from the profiles, and you could select the department, the company, their office, their state, the province, title as part of that, and basically build these out. So actually go back, let's just put company in to start with, and then you can do strings in also, and these are just free text strings for you that you would want in there. So if you wanted to include something that was standardized, I'm just going to use it as an example, but you have R&D and you want to include that for everyone as part of that prefix, you can append that in, and you can see here what it's doing is it's going to basically put the company in, then put RD in, then be the group name after that. I've seen companies that want to have underscores as part of it and basically build it out that way to separate those different sections. So it gives you the capability to build either that prefix, and the same capabilities are here for the suffix. Don't need to check that. But again, just appending whatever piece that you want in there, and defining any of these attributes you can leverage as part of them, and it pulls them right from the profiles, and the string for the suffix. So That's really how you basically build out the, what did I use over there? So let's put in department. So you can see here that what it's going to do is it's going to put in the company value attribute from their profile, RD, the group name, and then the department, and that's going to be the structure of it. So at this point, you can save this. Now, depending on how fast this updates, it usually takes policies for a while for it to update. It can actually take up to about 24 hours for it to apply, but that's in there now. So, you know, if we create a team, we should actually see this at least once the policy is applied. So the other part was the expirations. And, you know, this is just a look at that. You have the capability to define the lifetime, and there's two fixed values that are part of it. So either, you know, a annual expiration on your team, and or every 6 months essentially. But then you can also define a custom value. So if you wanted to have it basically go through that process every 30 days, you can set whatever that is that you want to have. And then, you know, it gives you the capability to specify who the contact is if there is no owners on the site. So this actually, you know, you could even use this as a way on a, you know, periodic basis, every 30 days, to go through and look for sites that have you know, no team owners. If there's no activity and there's no team owners, you'll get a notification out of it. So it might help with some of, you know, that, looking for places where there's no team owners. But then, you know, you can specify how you want this applied. So right now, the way I laid it out is, you know, it's for all groups, but you can go through and you can select, you know, any of the groups that you want to, you know, for it to apply to. So if you went through and, okay, so we're going to just select this first one and add that in. You know, obviously you can add them all in the environment, and just add that in, and it'll apply for that specific site. So that's pretty much the basics around setting up the expiration and the naming convention.
Russ, are you sharing your screen? There's a bunch of things in the chat.
I am.
You've published it? Okay. Okay, just making sure. There's a bunch of people saying, anyone else seeing the wrong sharing screen? Not seeing settings being mentioned, but see the cursor moving, only see site and group settings homepage. I think that's where you are, right?
No.
Okay, and that's what I'm seeing as well, the site and group settings homepage.
Hold on a second. Okay, so this was the page.
All right, now I see groups expiration.
Okay, all right. So apologize for that you couldn't see any of that. So the other part that I wanted to cover with you is in the compliance center, compliance admin center. And under the show all here, if you scroll down, you'll see there's two sections: information protection and information governance. So if we start with the information protection, it gives you the capability in here to set up a label, and there is some that are some defaults that'll show up here in a second, but you can define a new label. So if you wanted to do something like top secret for company proprietary information, you can put that in here. You can define what your description is, company intellectual property. And, any type of admin description that you want to add in there for it. And that will allow you to set the initial part of it. Now, this isn't actually set up. There's an additional step that you need to take using PowerShell that has not been taken on this demo environment here. But when you apply that PowerShell setting, it gives you the capability to enable this groups and sites here. And that's what applies it to Teams and SharePoint information. The default for a label is it gives you access to the files and emails as part of it, and apply the labels for Azure Purview in terms of SQL columns. But once you set that, you can then go through and define, what are we doing with it? Are we encrypting files? Are we just marking the files? And you can then set the encryption standards and what the configuration is that you want to do. I'm going to actually knock that off. But then you can define what are the like a watermark that you want to have. So if you want to say something like if you wanted to basically stamp top secret on every single piece of content that is where this sensitivity label is applied, you can basically create that there and it'll apply it. And you also have the capability to apply it as a part of the header or footer. And then so you can also set up the auto labeling for those files or emails where it happens automatically, and defining the protection settings. So does this level of access apply for external users? And you can set that, or device access. You can basically prevent your users, if a user is on their internal laptop and accessing the information, that where they would be able to access it that way, versus if they're on their phone out in the field. This gives you the capability to block that type of access off of a mobile device while still giving that same user access to the information when they're on their laptop. So if you have a scenario that fits like that, but this allows you to basically set up that labeling, those sensitivity labels. And once you get through, you have everything defined the way you want. You can basically go through and just create the label. And at that point, now you have that new label that should be created here. There it is. So, that's just the steps in terms of setting up the information protection. And you just have to, I can share out the PowerScript code to basically apply it. You have to be a global admin to run it and enable that capability on your Teams and SharePoint sites specifically. So just wanted to kind of give you a quick walkthrough of that piece of it. And the other thing was, I just thought, was the governance, the information governance specifically, because now you have those labels that are here, and what our other label, our newly created label, is not showing up. But you can go in here and define, what the retention policies and all are associated with these labels here and here. So if something's marked confidential, how long is it retained within the environment? Is it in this case, this one is for 7 years. When it hits that, what happens? It triggers a review and sends a notification to the paralegals to basically take a look at that piece of content and make a decision on what actually happens with it next. So that's basically you're setting up your labels and applying the policies to them, and that's right in the information governance section of the admin center, under compliance admin center. So those are those pieces. The other one I wanted to see if I can show you. I got to jump onto my other laptop and see if I can share from there and get it to work out. So just give me a second here, and share, yes. Screen two. Okay, so hopefully you're able to see that there is several app templates available, and these are I'll call them starter app templates from Microsoft. They're not the app templates they're not the templates that you're used to using as part of provisioning a site using the desktop client. They have enhanced functionality with them that including interaction with like Power Automate and Power Apps and Azure App Services and all. So the nice thing about this, and the one that I'm showing here, is that this gives you the capability to build a custom provisioning process for your organization. And what Microsoft has provided is all the components to start with. And as I walk you through it, I'll just show you just some of the ways of different configuring it. But essentially, think of it as a Power App or Power Platform application that leverages Azure services, and then it's surfaced up inside of Teams. So on the left rail, I have it pinned here already, but it's and you can call it whatever you want, but I called it request a team. And normally that's just, if you go under here and you do, your search, it would basically show up under here, and you would basically from there just select it and just pin it to the left rail. Or if you don't want to pin it, but what happens is one of the benefits for this is you can turn off the out of the box provisioning for creating new teams for your entire organization and give them access to this app, which actually uses a service account to provision the team. So even though the user doesn't have permissions to provision the team, the app has the permissions, and there's an approval process that I'll show you. And you can apply the logic for how you want those approvals to when those approvals should be applied. But in this case, I'll just start with, create a team here, and it brings up the screen that allows you to select the template that you want to use. And you'll see these are a different set of templates that are available with the client provisioning. And you can add additional templates to it, but you've got, like the crisis prevention, incident response, and some of these are similar to what you have available out of the box, but you have a set of here to start with. And what we've done in the past with other clients is, we would create, their company specific versions of like an incident response or a departmental template that's specific for what, like the channels they want to have and all to start with. So it allows them to come in, and they're always starting with something that's, approved based on what the company wants to enable. So a lot of times I use sales as an example, and I'm sure it applies to a lot of other departments, but the companies will come in, and you can go in and, like, if you wanted to provision a sales team for every division, region, group, office, throughout a multinational company, you have, you know, thousands of teams. Whereas, and if you start with the out of the box, they all become very different over time. Whereas if you have, okay, this is what we're going to start with, everybody's going to get these channels and have these apps available, you can create a sales department template, and through this process, use that consistently so that, you know, they're starting from that perspective. But then you can define the privacy capability with it, and this really gives you just access to two different capabilities. So you'll notice that the capability to provision an org-wide site or team is not available through this. It's just giving you the capability to provide either a private site that where you're specifying all the permissions for it, for the team members, or a public that where anybody within the organization can join that team. So we'll say a private one in this case. And this is one of the sites that I like to, forms essentially, the screens as part of this, and this is all Power Apps at this point, that you can go through and modify what's here. So on this screen, you've basically just got the team name, description, and a business reason, but you could actually have them populate things like division and you know, department, or, you know, anything else that you wanted to collect that's like important for you to have an inventory of your teams across your organization. You can modify this screen to include that information so that you can collect it for data collection purposes. But if we just add a name in here, demo incident response team, and you know, it gives you the capability right away at this point to check, does that exist? Okay, that's a good name. It doesn't exist. So then you know, it requires a description. But you can define what fields are required. So if I can spell. And you know, you're just provisioning each step of it, and it's very similar, you know, to what's available out of the box. But here's one of the things that's different is you have the capability to set who your two owners are, and they're required. You can't set it up with just a single owner. So I'll just specify myself and my daughter, and I'll leave this the members go for now. And now that's basically, you know, it's just going to give you a screen. Okay, so here's all the information. Are you ready to submit it? So at that point, you can basically submit this. And now this actually takes a minute to run, but I can show you some other screens. So what's happening right now is that when I submitted that form, it executed a Power Automate workflow on the back end that goes through and sets up the SharePoint site and pulls together some other information around it. After that's done, it actually executes a Azure app that runs in Azure, and it is also a workflow to finish the provisioning steps. And so it separates that out, because with the Azure app piece, you can set that to run on a schedule, and you can set it to run, you know, how often do you want to provision sites? Do you want to run them just at night and just run them actually at that point? Or do you want it to wait a minute and then provision the site? Or, you know, do you want it to basically happen instantly? So with the Azure app, you can basically say, you know, I want to set this to run, you know, 1 second after the Azure app is executed. It'll go out and it'll read the information that you set for the site that was being created, and then go out and provision that. So within here, though, you can see some of the other sites that I've created. ones that are pending approval, what's been created, and what's has not been fully submitted yet even, and versus one that has been submitted. So now if I refresh this, that should change, and yeah, it's now pending approval because it has executed the beginning of those workflows. Now what happens is there's two things. One, I can go up here, and because I'm a team admin, I would have gotten notified that this is one that's pending approval here, and I can click on view details and click approve and do it that way. Or there's a team that actually runs behind the scenes with it that if I scroll up here, you'll see some of the other ones that I've done that it puts a request in here for approval. So if you have a group, an IT group, maybe there's 20 people in the group and any one of them can approve the site, you basically add them to this admins group, and then they all get notified anytime somebody submits a request to create a new site. And from here,
hey Russ.
Yes.
Russ, bunch of questions about how to get this.
Oh.
How to create it, the scripts, and a couple fun questions. I don't see this request a team in my list of available Teams apps. Right.
So it's an app template. It is available on the Microsoft site. I will, after I'm finished here, I will share out the URL for that. There's a list of about 20 or 25 of these app templates. They are pretty extensive to install. And this was the first one of these templates that I installed personally. And, it took the better part of a day to work through each stage of setting that up and, getting everything working that it was expecting inside of the environment. So, it's not something that you're going to have just anybody, within the organization do. But your IT team should. There was nothing that was rocket science about it. So you can, all the steps are there. There is a So the list of the app templates is out on the Microsoft site. I'll share that URL. But all the code for provisioning this is actually available on GitHub. So and on there it has where you can download like all the screens, all the the Power App forms, the Power Automate, and the Azure App Services. It's all there, and then you can basically modify it from there. So I'll share out both of those URLs, but there's a detailed guideline that you have to go through for installing it, and they also have issues that people have run into with installing it. That so there's a knowledge base there that if you need a resource to go back to, it can help you do that install. So if at this point, if I click approve, it's going to want me to add a comment in here, and I'm just going to say approved and slide it down a little bit and hit submit. I should have done that when I first started talking there. From this point forward, it'll take about a minute to actually provision the team. Susan, were there other questions in there?
The basic questions about talking about how did you do this?
Okay. So.
And Susan Emma Clements has been very helpful in posting some the links.
Great, yeah. Great, thanks. So, there's, like I said, there's a zip file that you basically download that installs the app itself. But prior to that, there's a lot of requirements that you have to go through in terms of having the right PowerShell modules, the right versions of those modules, all installed and on your client machine that you're using to do this installation. You need to be a global admin to the tenant to do this provisioning. And it's a lot of it. It's PowerShell walking through that steps, but it'll go out and it creates the Power App, uploads the Power App. It creates the Power Automate workflow behind it and creates the Azure App Services. Once you've set all of you've met all the prerequisites, it handles that. And I can show you some of it with it, but so with this, let's see if, so this request a team site, one of the things this admin site here, if I jump out to this, let's see, where do I have that? I think I've got that open. Okay, so this is the site behind the request a team app, and you'll notice that one of the things it does here is, well, if I go under site contents, it actually provisions these 3 lists here. So one's for your all your settings that are associated with it and that it uses to basically provision those sites. And you can define this all here. So this is, this is the URL for my tenant and all that I had to specify.
Russ, another
yes.
really great question. Is the Azure app or Azure services an extra cost?
Yes. Yes. There, and it depends on how your licensing is set up. And, if your organization has an enterprise license for it, I'm not sure that it's actually, I think it's actually included at that point. But you can also do a pay as you go, that where you're paying for the cycles that are actually used by that Azure app. So whenever it runs, it's going to use cycles, and you pay for that on a monthly basis. So that's part of the setup in here is to go in here and set up this information in this list. If I go back to the other lists here, you'll see that the team requests list is here, and what I've done is it'll basically list out all of the ones that are somebody has, in this case myself, has provisioned in here. And once a site is approved, and I believe when it was the provisioning was complete, it goes through and it has, once it has the approval date. So let's see if I refresh this, if that changes for that one, because that one should be approved now. Oh, that's a different one I did. That was one of the previous ones that I did that I didn't. Here's the one that I just did. So the demo incident response. And you can see you've got access to the names of the owners, any members that you applied, the visibility, the status of it. So right now it's in the creation process, so it hasn't actually completed. What we'll do is we'll get a notification inside of Teams letting us know when that is complete. So it added me to the demo incident response, but it hasn't completed. So that's there. But I set the highlighting on this just so that I could see which ones were actually approved on this list for quick, easy identification. So that one's there, and then the last one in that list is the templates that are available, and what the names are. You can manage them. What the ID is, basic description information. So nothing that actually affects the what's in the template itself, but the description pieces of it that you saw in the interface as we went through is laid out here. So I want to just jump back to Teams here a second and see if that has finished. Okay, so here's what was generated. So you can this template that I picked was probably not the best example, but it has the the basics of it. And usually what it'll do is here's the other ones. So you can see it generated an announcements channel, calendar channel, Champions Corner, and Teams forms. So, you can basically define what those other ones are as part of your template, and it'll provision that and set them up for you. And if you go under your managed team here, and you can see that it added, Russ and Rachel as the owners on it. And it also specified the request a team, which is my service account that I'm using to provision it, as an owner. So you've got the 3 owners there, and any members that you would specify would also be listed in there. So I think that is kind of the overall of the provisioning. Any other questions in there? So
mostly to share the slide deck.
Okay. Well, I will certainly do that. And instead of jumping over, let me just take a second here. I'm not going to change the deck, but I want to see if there was anything else I had that I wanted to cover with everybody. And I guess, one thing I did want to mention is, because Sue's framework is so customizable, you can take these pieces and plug it in there so that if they're using her resource center, you can basically use that to launch these apps and all. And, so it gives your users a single place to go to get access to, some of this other functionality for them. And I think that's it. I think that was really it. Sue, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your vast knowledge with us. Everybody that's attended today, I want to thank you and all for your participation and greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us. I hope you found today's session valuable. One thing I want to share with you is that our next Teams Day Online event is going to be the global event that we have done in the past. It will be held on April 7th and April 8th. And it looks like we're going to have somewhere around 90 to 100 speakers again, and for that 2-day event. So I'm really excited about that. And Sue is going to join us for that event. So, we'll have some more great information to share. And outside of that, I guess I will go through the Q&A and just answer any open questions that are in there, any additional information that I can provide. But thank you all again for your time, and I look forward to having more sessions like this in the future with you guys. Thank you for joining. Take care, everyone.